Alright, so in this video I want to talk about what I would consider an interesting feature of our political system. A good place to start might be with the Electoral College, and maybe we'll save that for another video, but this is actually about something that's known as gerrymandering. So in this video we'll talk a little bit about what gerrymandering is. The basic idea is that suppose you have a population that's split, 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. Okay, and I know there's other political parties out there for sure, but those are still definitely the two big major players. So suppose you have this population that's split 50-50. It turns out by using this technique of gerrymandering, what you can actually do is over-represent a constituency in the political system. So it may actually turn out that the Republicans get more representation or the Democrats actually get more representation by this technique of gerrymandering. So I certainly have my own opinion about whether I think gerrymandering is appropriate or not, but I don't want to cloud your decision, I just want to discuss it. So without further ado, let's talk about the mathematics of gerrymandering. So let's start talking about gerrymandering and how a mathematically savvy politician is able to gain an advantage and really game the system. So in our House of Representatives, there are exactly 435 total seats available, and the number of seats is roughly based on the population of each state. And again, the House of Representatives has many functions, but a couple of big functions is it serves as one of the checks and balances to the power of the presidency, and it's also a way for local communities to get representation at the highest level of government. So if there's more than one seat available to a particular state, those seats become divided among congressional districts. So if a state has 8 seats, there would be 8 districts in that state. So you can look at the map, you can see places like Alaska, Montana, Hawaii. Since they have small populations, they have 1 seat. You can see as you go to the coasts, though, you can see all the little different colors. And again, that's because the populations there are larger, so there's simply more seats available. So every 10 years we do a census here in the country, and what they do with the census is it's just bookkeeping, keeping track of the population, and to see how the population centers have shifted and changed over those 10 years. And it used to be the case that that's when you would do a redistricting and kind of redraw those congressional districts. But in 2006, the Supreme Court ruled that you can actually do this anytime you want. So does this cause problems, right? That's the whole issue here. And the overwhelming opinion is that yes, it does cause big problems, in fact. So before we jump into, again, exactly what gerrymandering is and to look at some examples, I went back to 1992 and I looked at the popular vote. So if you look, most of the elections are relatively close. And if you look at any poll or any data, the country is relatively split between Republican and Democrat. So, okay, I know there are other parties out there for sure, but at this point in time, the big players are still Democrats and Republicans. They're by far the two major parties. But, if you look, things are extremely close. I think the biggest gap in here was in, what was it? That was in 1996, it looks like. And that's when Clinton beat Dole by a pretty sizable margin. 2008, Obama did pretty well against McCain. Most recently here in 2016, I think we're still actually tallying votes. I made this video here, the elections were recent. But Clinton just barely nudged out Trump in the popular vote, but because of our wonderful Electoral College, Trump got the presidency. So again, Electoral College, maybe another video for another time. So the thing I want to point out, though, is that those races were relatively close. Nobody won by, more than 10 percentage points. But I went back to 2004. If you look at the House of Representatives, if you look at the races for those seats, 361 of those seats were won by more than 20 percentage points. 53 seats were won by 10 to 20 points, 11 seats were won by 5 to 10. Only 10 of those seats were decided by less than 5 percentage points. So you could say that only 10 of those seats were competitive. Now, there's some reasons for sure why some races may not be competitive. Maybe you have a strong incumbent, somebody that's already has been serving in office, and people, really like them. A lot of times those people win in a landslide. But there's something wrong when 361 seats are won by such a large margin. So if you do the math, 10 out of those 435, it says only roughly 2.3% of the seats up for grab were competitive. So given that our population is relatively divided between Democrats and Republicans, what's the problem? So, if you guess gerrymandering, well, you made a good guess. It's one of the big problems. It's, again, not to say it's the only one, but it's certainly an issue. So what exactly is gerrymandering? So the definition of gerrymandering is basically you just cut up the boundaries of your state so as to favor one of the parties or class. That's all it is. You're just divvying up the map. Let's be clear, both parties do this. One of the big problems with this, though, is that whoever is in control within the state, those are the people that get to cut up the map. So what do you think is going to happen? Well, probably the people that are in control are going to stay in control. And this is one of the problems. We've got so much data now. You can actually pull data and estimate how people are going to block, not just, certainly state by state, city by city. You can actually get data down to blocks. This block in New York City is going to vote this way, and if you go one block over, they're going to vote this way, and if you go one block over, they're going to vote this way. And now with computers, you can run all these simulations to see, well, if we chop it up this way, what happens? And if we chop it up this way, what happens? So again, the people that are in control in the legislature, those are the people that get to now stack the deck in their favor. So let's look at exactly how gerrymandering works. Let's look at a couple examples. So first off, let's turn to an extreme example. The other examples are going to be pretty similar though. So suppose a state has exactly 6 districts and 6 million people total. And they're equally divided along party lines. There's 3 million Republicans and 3 million Democrats. So suppose we can cut up those districts so that one district has all Democrats. It has 1 million Democrats. Well, clearly that district is going to vote Democratic, right? I mean, they're all Democrats. But the problem is, in the remaining districts, so now you have 3 million Republicans versus 2 million Democrats remaining. If you can now cut up those remaining 5 districts so that that ratio is kept relatively constant, well, now in those other 5 districts, the Republicans have a 3-2 advantage. There's a very high likelihood, I mean, if you can get your voters to turn out, there's a high likelihood that those districts are now going to go Republican. So what's happened? You've got 1 seat for a Democrat, you've got 5 seats for a Republican, even though the population is relatively split. So again, in that case, Democrats would receive only about 17% of the representation, despite being 50% of the population. This is the big problem with gerrymandering. And does this happen? Yeah, it happens regularly. It happens all the time. So let's look at another example here. So again, just kind of a smaller example, but the ideas are exactly the same. So in my little diagram here, blue dots are going to represent Democratic households or a Democratic voter, and a red dot is going to represent a Republican household, Republican voter. So here we've got, if you count, you've got exactly 32 Democrats and 32 Republicans here. And let's assume we've got a district, we've got 8 districts, and since we've got 64 voters, we're going to have 8 voters in each district. And, okay, so you can see they're relatively, kind of somewhat mixed around. If you were a Republican in charge, how would you draw the map? So here's one way I've carved up the map. So hopefully you can see my bold lines there pretty well. And notice what's happened, for example, in the top left corner and at the bottom middle. What have we done? We've put, basically what we said a second ago, you put a bunch of Democrats in those districts. So those 2 districts are clearly going to go Democratic. But if you look at the remaining 6 districts, now there's a much larger ratio of Republicans, and there's a good chance Republicans are going to win those districts. So assuming a Democrat does vote, for the Democratic candidate and likewise for the Republicans, in this case you're going to have 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Well, hey, Democrats can play the same game. Here's another drawing of that map, exact same map, where in this case you have 6 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So there are certainly a couple restrictions on how you chop up the map. One is that the districts have to have relatively equal population, and the other is that they have to be continuous. So you couldn't have, one part of a district here and then another district that's kind of totally sectioned off. It has to be one continuous chunk, and you can see that in my graph, that's what happened. So do you think this is fair? So I said at the beginning that I wasn't going to be biased, but yeah, I don't think that this is fair. There's something wrong. And one of the big problems with gerrymandering is not only do you get this scenario where some people are overrepresented and another group of people are underrepresented, but it actually leads to very partisan politics. And the reason for that is that, okay, so suppose you're in a place that's overwhelmingly Republican. You know it's going to vote Republican. So in the primaries, that's when you decide, which Republican candidate do you want to run and, who's going to be the Democratic challenger. In the primaries, because our voter turnout is so extremely low in this country, that you often get people at one extreme or the other. And why is that? So the people that turn out in these primaries are people that are usually very passionate, and they tend to be either extremely liberal or extremely conservative. So what's going to happen in that Republican state? Probably in the primaries, the extremely conservative people are going to turn out, and there's a good chance they're going to look at those candidates and they're going to vote for the extremely conservative person. They're not going to vote for the person in the middle. That candidate that has those extreme views, again, liberal or conservative, that's who they're going to vote for. So now what happens when you go to the general election? Now instead of having a moderate Republican or a moderate Democrat that's willing to compromise, you now have these people that are on the far left or the far right. And those are the people that end up finally winning the congressional seats, and then they go off to Washington, D.C., and they're not willing to compromise. There's all this infighting. What's the solution? I don't have one for you. There's different things that have been proposed, to elect an independent council. There's one argument, hey, nobody's really independent. They've tried to come up with mathematical solutions. And it actually turns out to be a hard mathematical problem to do these, to somehow figure out a fair mathematical way to chop up districts so that this gerrymandering doesn't occur to really favor one side or the other. I say elect me to solve the problem. I'll get some good people on it, and we'll try to make things fair. So again, we all have our political views. We're in a current place where nobody's willing to compromise, and I think gerrymandering is part of the problem. But what's the solution? I don't know. I hope maybe one of you clever people will come up with something, because at this point in time, our political state is kind of sad. So anyways, I just wanted to share a little bit about gerrymandering. Sorry to wax philosophically there for a moment. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, feel free to post comments, questions. I love them. And thanks for watching.